Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenour, and we're going to have another jam-packed show today, per usual. Hope everyone has been doing well and staying safe, and for any Kansas City Chiefs fans, hope you've been able to recover from that tough loss against the Bucs. But the city of Tampa Bay, or should I say Champa Bay now, keeps putting teams in the title game. I mean, the Buccaneers, the Lightning, and of course the Rays, but we will have to see if the Rays can get back to that point next year. Anyways, diving into today's show, I want to get into some speculations I have about what a delayed season could do to baseball, and another buy it or deny it segment as always, but I don't want to spoil all of it. So getting into today's show, I'll first touch on any and all of the recent news in the MLB and get into some free agency news and trade news as I usually do. Later on, I'll get into the concerns I have and the effects I could see a delayed season could have on baseball in general, but specifically this season with the pandemic still going on. And as I move out of the second segment, I'll get into which recent moves I feel have put some teams into a contending conversation for either the playoffs or even the World Series, and the impact these players could have on their new teams. And then, as always, be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into sharing another buy it or deny it segment, where I'll discuss whether I buy or deny the idea of the recent re-signing of Marcell Ozuna to the Braves and the signing of Trevor Bauer to the Dodgers can solidify each team's respective spots in next year's NLCS for a rematch. So we've got a lot to cover today, a lot of things going on, but I want to kick things off with a recent trade that went down between the Rangers and the A's. This is probably the most, I would say, recent news in free agency, and it really didn't really involve any free agents because it was a trade, but it was a trade between the Rangers and the A's, and the A's sent over slugger Chris Davis to the Rangers in exchange for struggling shortstop Elvis Andrews. Now, 3 other minor leaguers were involved in this trade as well, but this is a very interesting move, and I was thinking about it more yesterday. It's honestly a move that I felt that in 2016, it might have made huge headlines, right? I mean, in 2016, Chris Davis had an absolute monster season, he belted 42 home runs, and Elvis Andrews was way back on top of his game. Now, Andrews, I would say, has been struggling the last 3 seasons. I mean, he's batted a combined .241 over the last 3 years. He's got a 76 OPS plus. 76 OPS plus. That's pretty horrendous if you ask me. And then his OPS overall in the last 3 years is a 654. So Andrews has really struggled, and then Chris Davis has battled injuries the last 2, maybe even 3 years. But again, they both have a lot of potential. They both have a lot of talent, and they have shown that. They've already have displayed that ability. I mean, Elvis Andrews being an all-star before in his career, Chris Davis being somebody that, I mean, he belted 40-plus home runs in 3 consecutive seasons. 2016 he had 42, 2017 he had 43, and in 2018 he had 48. And if you're hitting 40-plus bombs year after year after year, you're clearly a talented player, right? I mean, that's very hard to do. And I think that, in all honesty, the real winner of this trade was the Rangers, because the Rangers go out, they get a guy that they don't have to really worry about him playing in the field because he's going to probably be a DH, I would imagine. Stick him to DH. Sure, he has a really high strikeout rate, and obviously you're going to get that with guys that are big home run guys. They're going to have higher strikeout rates. It's just kind of how it is. And you go out and you get him. You also got David Dahl, and then you already have Joey Gallo. That's a pretty solid 3, perennial, I would say, top-tier hitters. I mean, I know that they all 3 have the ability to be up there in, high ranks in the hitting world in baseball. They all 3 have that potential. I mean, David Dahl, not far removed from an all-star year. Joey Gallo has put up really good numbers before 2020. In those previous seasons, he was putting up good numbers. And then the same thing with Chris Davis. So I think that if everybody can get back to their former selves in, 2018, 2019, and Chris Davis can go back to his 2016, 2017 self, this is going to be a pretty good Rangers team. I don't know if it's necessarily playoff Rangers team, but I definitely think that it's going to be a team in Texas that is better than we've seen in recent years. They also went out and got Mike Foltynewicz, so now they've really kind of helped out with the pitching a little bit. Although Foltynewicz has struggled over the last 2 or 3 years, he's still a capable pitcher. He's an all-star capable pitcher. So I'm excited to see kind of where this move goes for the Rangers. As for the A's, in all honesty, I think that, they just needed to fill that position, right? I mean, the shortstop position was vacant. Marcus Semien has gone because of free agency, so they needed a glove to go over there. And he's a good glove. I just wonder about his hitting because, Andrews' OPS is just nowhere near where it should be. And the A's, they really struggled last year hitting. Matt Olson and Matt Chapman, they both really had struggling seasons. One of them had I think the lowest batting average in all of MLB out of all qualifying hitters. So if all three of them can come out of a slump that they're all three in right now, yeah, this A's team could be dangerous. But if they continue to slump like they have been in the last year, 2 years, 3 years, then it's going to be, I don't think, a very good A's team. And I definitely think the Rangers right now are the winners of this. They're both similar ages, too. So Chris Davis and Elvis Andrews, both around 32, 33. So you're not really getting, kind of the short end of the stick, if you will, with having a guy for maybe 2 years and then he retires, or maybe 2 years and then he fizzles out. You're going to have them for at least maybe 3, 4, if you really can push it 5 years possibly, especially with Chris Davis, since he won't probably be an everyday position player. But ultimately, I'm going to give the win to the Rangers on this one. I think that they just clearly, they went out and got somebody that's got a lot more left in him than I think Elvis Andrews does, in my opinion. And, you've got a guy that his OPS plus has been below, 100 the last 2 years in Chris Davis, sure. But then before that, he had a string of 4 straight years where it was 120 and higher. And then he also had 4 straight years of an 800-plus OPS. So, again, Davis has got a lot of potential. It's just him staying healthy, and I think that Texas could be a revitalization of his career. So I think the Rangers win that one. We'll see how Andrews does in Oakland. Well, it'll be very interesting. I'll be paying very close attention to that one. But now we have also found a new home for the 2020 slugger of Marcell Ozuna, and I want to get into this headline because this is a huge, huge headline. And I don't know if it's a new home because he's coming right back because he's re-signing with the Atlanta Braves on a 4-year, $64 million deal. How is this not a big move for the Braves, right? They've gone out, they've done everything they've needed to do, in my opinion. They went out, they got veteran pitching, and they got a third veteran arm that they can go to and rely on in the playoffs, Charlie Morton. Then they go out and they re-sign one of the biggest breakout players of 2020, even though I wouldn't say it was a breakout season because he's been good before, but a huge career season in 2020. The reigning NL leading home run hitter, the reigning NL RBI leader in a Marcell Ozuna, and now I think you've put yourself into a totally different conversation in terms of contending for the playoffs and especially the World Series. And this is one of the biggest re-signs in all of baseball, right? You've got Real Muto going back to the Phillies, LeMahieu going back to the Yankees, but Ozuna going back to the Braves, I think, is going to tilt the scale incredibly for this team because you just saw how good that team was with having not only Freeman in the lineup, but then Ozuna, and then they had all of those other pieces to fill in where they needed Ronald Acuna Jr., Ozzy Albies, Dansby Swanson, Travis Darnell. You had all of these other guys that were just put so perfectly, and then their main headline guys were Marcell Ozuna and Freddie Freeman. So I think that Ozuna is going to bring a lot of balance to this lineup. It'll take a little bit of the pressure off of Freeman. I just don't know if he's going to have the year that he had last year, right? That's hard to repeat, especially it's going to be 162 games, so whatever that would be comparable of the numbers he put up in 60 games, he would have to do that on a 162-game scale. And with him going to the NL and now the universal DH is not going in effect, that could pose an issue for him because I don't know if he's going to be the fielder that he was in, 2017. He's had shoulder injuries the last 2 or 3 years. He did not really play in the field at all last year because the DH was universal. So, and I'm also kind of shocked that he didn't wind up going onto an AL team because at one point or another, there was about 10 teams that were interested in him. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, the Astros and the White Sox were 2 teams that were incredibly interested in him. And if he went on either of those teams, I think we would be having a very different conversation right now. So I'm very curious to see how his adjustment or his readjustment back to playing in an everyday position in the field is going to do to his health, is going to do to his performance from the plate. It's going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be a very intriguing thing to watch. And I want to see how, they move the outfielders around, right? I mean, you've got Acuna, you've got Adam Duvall. You can move them around. Maybe you can put Ozuna over in left. But if Ozuna does not work out fielding-wise, they're going to have to go to either Ender Inciarte, who batted 190 in 2020, or Nick Markakis, and he's 37 years old. So they really need to hope that he's going to be able to perform in the field. But if he's so good from the plate that it kind of overcompensates, I could see them just sticking with Ozuna in the lineup just so they can have his bat there. Because, like I said, Ender Inciarte is clearly not going to be the offensive weapon that Marcell Ozuna is going to be. So I think that this is going to be a move that pays off greatly for this team, and I think that ultimately we could see the Braves taking that next step, going past the NLCS, getting over that hump that I think that, they really, I mean, if you want to say they're trying to get over a hump, they ran into a new hump last year in terms of they had not gone that far in over 20 years, so they got to a new point. They just couldn't get over that point. So hopefully they can get back to that same point and finally get over that hump this year. And I think that re-signing Marcell Ozuna is going to do exactly that. And I think that we'll see how that plays out in this season. And not to mention, it's going to be a tough NL East. And that's the other thing, is that it's going to be a very, very tight neck race atop the leaderboard in the NL East the entire season. So we'll have to see. Nonetheless, it's going to be a good one. But now there's some sad news, and I hate to bring in some sad news, but there is some sad news coming from the baseball world as famed journalist for ESPN, Pedro Gomez, recently passed away on Monday, February 8th, very unexpectedly, and it has really rocked the entire MLB world, the entire sports world. And, I mean, for me personally, I grew up listening to Pedro Gomez and watching him and really being kind of inspired by him because of how good of a journalist he was. I mean, he started out with the Miami News, then he wrote for the San Diego Union for a few years, and then he became a beat writer, actually, for the Oakland Athletics for the San Jose Mercury News. So he had a lot of early on, I would say kind of different roles, different positions very early on in his career, bounced around to various news outlets after that, like the Sacramento Bee, the Arizona Republic, just a couple to name a few. And then he joined ESPN in 2003, and he was covering actually the Game 6 of the 03 NLCS between the Cubs and the Marlins, and he wound up covering over 25 World Series and 20 MLB All-Star games. So talk about pure journalistic greatness. And it was pretty impressive because he was also able to cover the 2016 College World Series where his son Rio, who was playing for the Arizona Wildcats at the time, he was actually partaking in the World Series. So something that was probably really cool for him as a father, but also as a journalist to cover, and you kind of killed two birds with one stone, being able to see your son play, cover that College World Series, probably a very special moment for him. He was born of Cuban immigrants who came over. He was a well-respected, loved by many journalists. I mean, you could tell the day that it happened, the day after that it happened, I mean, everybody was emotional. Everybody on TV was emotional. And I just always admired how fun and lighthearted his style of delivering news was, but also how precise and accurate he was with his details. And he was a very special journalist. And I mean, I don't think there's really, I think, anything but nice things that you could say about him. And even everybody at ESPN, they were even saying, yeah, I mean, the guy was a genuine great person. And again, I always kind of, when I look back at who has inspired me to get into this business, into sports broadcasting, into sports journalism, I always kind of immediately go to the obvious, the Tim Kirchens or the Mike Breens or, the Buster Olneys or whatever. But then I think we forget about those other guys that were there too the entire time, right? I mean, Pedro Gomez, he's a perfect example. And I know that he wasn't really in the front as much in the recent years as he was normally, but growing up, that's all I would see. It was usually Tim Kirchen and Pedro Gomez. I actually told a friend the other day, I said, Pedro Gomez and Tim Kirchen, I kind of feel like they were the prequels to Buster Olney and Jeff Passan. And so it was fun to watch Pedro Gomez report. It was fun to watch him do his job. And, he was a huge influence on myself and probably a lot of other journalists out there too. So rest in peace, Pedro Gomez, and all the condolences go to the family as well and friends as well, because I'm sure it's a very hard time, especially during this year. I'm sure it's very, very difficult. But I want to wrap things up. I want to get into a little bit more positive news, I guess, if you will, and more so just a little update in regards to COVID vaccines, actually, as the MLB has become quite involved in the handling of and handing out of the vaccines, with certain MLB teams now opening their stadiums to house large vaccination sites, which I think is going to do wonders in the long run with distributing the vaccine to people, getting it out to many, 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 many people. I mean, I think it's going to be a great thing. I think it's going to expedite the process. I think it's going to speed things up. And I think that, people might not realize more people can get more access to being vaccinated through this because of just how many people can be there, and it'll be okay. It's not going to be some small little minute clinic that you can't really have more than 10 people inside of because of COVID. Here at an MLB stadium, it's a little bit different. You can spread people out. Now, the teams that are doing it are the Marlins, the Mets, Yankees, Padres, Dodgers, Astros, Red Sox, and Athletics. I'll run through kind of what the different teams are doing, kind of the different parameters, what they're planning to do, what they're planning to accomplish. So the Marlins, they want to try and they plan to hand out about 1,000 vaccines daily to people 65 and older at first. So people that are, older and more up in age, they're going to be kind of the first in line. And I think the Marlins, getting 1,000 out, I've seen a lot of different, reports about how many vaccines people or the government or whomever, the health people, they want to get out to people. And I think 1,000 is a good number. I think it's definitely a fair gauge as of right now. I'm not really well read on what the situation is with the vaccines and the rollout. I've heard all sorts of different things, but I think that the Marlins are doing a good job with trying to get it out as quickly as you can. And then the Mets, they're actually allowing certain eligible people to come, and it is one of New York's mega sites for vaccination. And then the other mega site is the Yankee Stadium, and they're using theirs as a mega massive kind of vaccine site. But the New York Yankees, they're making you have to be a Bronx resident, and they want to make at least 15,000 appointments a week. So the Marlins want to do 1,000 vaccines daily, and the Yankees want to do 15,000 appointments a week. So that's, I would say that's, about, 1,000 more vaccines on a daily basis. So that's a lot of vaccines. So we'll have to see if the Yankees can live up to that. But then the Padres, they actually have their site open 12 hours a day in their tailgate lot. And then the Dodgers, they want to vaccinate about 12,000 people. So these large markets with a lot of people in them, obviously they're going to be able to, and they want to have as much access to as many people to get the vaccine out to as many humans. Plain and simple, right? I mean, the Dodgers wanting 12,000 people a day. The Yankees having 15,000 appointments a week. The Astros, they are also going along kind of the same parameters, having the residents in that area 65 and older. They also want patients with underlying medical conditions, and then also healthcare workers to come and get the vaccine. So their parameters are a little bit more strict. But then the Red Sox, they're actually wanting people that are 75 and older. So they're a whole 10 years and up, as opposed to, the Marlins wanting 65 and older and whatnot. And the A's, they have their vaccine site opening up on February 16th. So although that all the vaccine sites are open, there are some that are still kind of getting started up, like the Athletics, but it's definitely going to speed up just the issuing out of these vaccines. And I think it's just going to be, I don't want to say an acceleration, because I feel like we can't really jump to that conclusion right now, because there's just so much still uncertainty, right? And there's so many people out there that are still kind of wavering on whether they should take the vaccine because, it was rushed and this and that and the other and so on and so forth. It's going to take a little bit of time to get these vaccines out to people. And I think that when these MLB teams, when these pro teams can step in and they can say, hey, we'll take over, we'll start having, vaccine sites at our stadiums, this, that, and the other, we will expedite the process. It takes a little bit of the pressure off the healthcare world. It takes a little bit of the pressure off of the healthcare workers in terms of, hospitals getting slammed and getting backed up with people wanting to get a vaccine and, all these other vaccine sites and whatnot. So having these MLB stadiums as almost, I don't want to say a safety net, but as an alternative, I think it's going to do wonders with how this vaccine will be issued out to people and we can get back to some normalcy. So we'll see how it goes. I'm very hopeful for it, but nonetheless, a lot of news going around the world, in the world of baseball, some good, some bad, but nonetheless, it's still news, right? But I want to get out of that segment, but don't go anywhere, folks, because when I get back from this commercial break, I'm going to get into discussing the effects and the concerns I have for baseball and the season in general this year if the start to the season is delayed at any point. So, folks, stay right there, because we'll be right back on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I got right into some news that has been circulating around the MLB and any and all of the free agency and trade news, but be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into another buy it or deny it, sharing whether I buy or deny the idea of the Braves bringing back Ozuna and the Dodgers getting Bauer could solidify the two teams' spots for next year's NLCS. But right now, I want to dive into discussing some concerns and effects I could see occurring of the baseball season being delayed possibly, and how it could affect things in the long run for baseball. So, a couple things I could see happening. First and foremost is, if the season is delayed, what is that going to do to players' payment, right? That's the first thing I want to know. Because let's think about it. Last year when they delayed the season, I remember there was a little bit of a speculation that the players wanted to play a certain amount of games, and if that was going to happen, the games were going to have to be pushed into November, and the owners did not want to have to pay the players until that point and all the way up into that point. So my point is this: if the season is delayed again, and maybe not to the point that it was last year, but at any sort of point, could that then extend the regular season into October a little bit, and then the playoffs do maybe eke into November just a little bit? Could that cause a problem? Could that cause a rift? And I know that right now tension between players and owners is at an all-time high. I mean, you hear it all the time in the news. There's almost this imminent kind of feeling that there's going to be a strike, that some sort of strike's going to happen, something's going to go down at some point or another, and I think that is kind of looming over all of the players, all of the owners, all of baseball's head right now. So I would be very curious to see what owners would say and what owners would do if the season was delayed and they said, well, we want to be paid up until this point. We want to be paid all the way till this date on, in this month, whatever. What is that going to do? What is that going to do with the owners? How is that going to affect the relationship the owners and the players have? Because if the owners say no, it's just going to cause an even bigger rift between the owners and players. And weirdly enough, that could turn into possibly some sort of strike, because the players are like, hey, we don't want to have to continue to risk our health. We don't want to have to keep getting the season delayed, and we don't want to keep getting, a short end of the stick with this payment. We want to be paid all the way up until the point that we should be. But the owners, on the other hand, are saying, well, we're losing all this money. We're not making any money with fans in the stands. We're not making any money on concessions, this, that, and the other. This could be a big nightmare if it's delayed and they have to pay them after a certain point, and the owners say, no, we don't want to do that. What this also could do if the season's delayed is this could throw things off with labor negotiations. I mean, if they cut a certain number of games, it could force a renegotiating of a new CBA deal, and we all know what happened last year when that happened, right? I mean, it was an absolute debacle. I felt that last year in the beginning of the MLB season, it was the only major professional sports league where I felt that COVID was not the main problem with the start of the season or the restart of a season. That was the biggest thing. It wasn't an issue in basketball. It wasn't an issue, or COVID was the main issue in basketball, or COVID was the main issue in hockey, and COVID was the main issue in football. But in baseball, they were the only ones that really, I think, had a public display of frustration about the payment, about the CBA, about the, just the labor negotiations. So this delay of the season, it could do a lot of things. And them having to go back and renegotiate a whole new CBA deal, that could even delay the season even more, because we all know once that gets into the conversation, that's when it gets really, I think, prolonged, right? I mean, you start to see teams and players kind of go back and forth. There's so many counter offers, and that was the big thing last year, right? I mean, the players are going to want, to play as many games as they can. They want to make some of this money back that they're losing. I mean, they only played 60 games. They get paid when they play, and as a result, they only played 60 games. They're not making what they usually make. So they want to get as many games as they can under their belt. The owners, they don't want to have to pay the players any more than they already have to, and if they can pay them a still good amount of money on a shorter kind of scale and a smaller schedule of payment, then they're going to do that. But that's the issue, is that there is a back and forth and that neither side is very happy. So with a delayed season, that could throw things off with labor negotiations. But then what else it could do is, we saw it last year, I think maybe players were growing increasingly frustrated with, maybe it was labor negotiations, but COVID issues too. Those two things kind of pushing, I think, certain players out of the picture of the season last year. Guys like David Price, Buster Posey, all kind of saying, hey, I don't want to play this year. I'm changing my mind. I'm opting out of this season. Lorenzo Cain, when the St. Louis Cardinals, they had their COVID scare and they were playing the Brewers and they were in town in St. Louis, Lorenzo Cain, he opted out of the season in the middle of the year. Literally, in the middle of the summer, he said, yep, I'm done. I'm going home. And I don't blame him, right? I mean, you're going out, you're risking your health, you're risking your safety, you're not playing as many games as you were. So, yeah, this could definitely, I think, change maybe even more guys' minds this year if there's still uncertainty about the vaccine and uncertainty about the virus, and then there's the season delayed. Some guys might just get frustrated and say, hey, I don't want to deal with this year. I'm not playing again. This will be year 2. Could we see guys that play or that miss 2 years of baseball because of this? And if that's the case, that could have some serious impact and serious effects, I think, on certain players' careers in the long run. Because if you think about it, Buster Posey cannot afford to be out of baseball for a second straight year. He's not getting any younger. He's had injuries in the past. He's, again, opted out of last year. 2019 was one of his worst years he's had. And so if he misses a second straight year, if he says, well, things with the virus have still not gotten better, the labor negotiations are a mess, the season is delayed, this, that, and the other, I don't want to come back. Then that really, I think, puts him even further behind the 8 ball. But that's going to be one big part of it, is the players and the relationship they have with the owners, how it affects the players' opinion and kind of mindset going into the season and wanting to play. But then how does this affect some broadcasting deals? I mean, are these owners and the commissioner and these business people who have a lot of money at stake, are they ready to possibly have to restructure deals on the fly? That was another big thing last year. The broadcasting deals were a big part of this. They had to go through, they had to, maneuver a couple things around, and they had to tailor them in regards to, when they were going to have games and this, that, and the other. So I think that this could have a lot of effects on baseball. This could have a lot of different things that could tailor and kind of affect baseball in a not-so-great way. And baseball's already gotten a reception, I think, that it's already not a very popular sport in America as it once was. Now, obviously, I think it's still greatly popular. I think that there's still millions upon millions upon millions of people that love baseball, myself included. But I think that there is still that kind of growing overall theme of, the MLB is not that fun, it's not that exciting, they always are arguing about money and, this, that, and the other. So this could definitely have some effects on baseball. But then the last thing that I think that could have the greatest effect on this is time. Simple. Time will be a crucial thing. And we saw it last year. Then labor negotiations went on and on and on. And, I think they went on for almost about a month because, just about a month, because the season was initially going to start back in, whenever it usually is, the very end of March, the very beginning of April. It got delayed to a month back into May. Then it got delayed again. And then they started to get into labor negotiations because they started bringing the players back. And then they delayed it even further and further and further. And then they finally had a 3-week spring or summer training camp, and then they went back to playing. And they did that, I think, because they said, hey, we're creeping up on July 4th. If we don't have any baseball by then or close to it, or really anytime soon after that, if we don't have any baseball come August 1, we've got to throw the season. We have to, because there's no way that they're going to be able to cram in 50 or 60 games, a legitimate season, into 2 months and then get into playoffs. They would have to literally play every single day. And in the middle of the pandemic, we already saw there was a big issue because teams were not playing the full 60-game schedule. So the time is going to be huge, because if they stall this and if they prolong this and if they drag this out, yada, 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 then this could be a problem. This could be a massive problem. Then we could maybe run into an issue of, could we have the same instance as last year, having a second straight year of 60 games? I don't think that's going to happen because of with the vaccine being out. It'll be the summertime. People will be, I think, a little bit more, teams at least, and we've already seen it. They've already been open to having fans back in the stands. We've already seen kind of a slow regression back, or progression, I should say, back into normalcy. So that is a good thing, I will say. But the impact on baseball that a delayed start to the season could have, it could, again, continue to push back the timetable in which the season should be starting normally, right? So I've already seen it in the NBA. I believe it's going to take them about another year, maybe 2 years, to offset the pandemic pause and then reset it back to being able to start the season at a normal time. Baseball could run into the same issue if they continue to delay the season. It could continue to throw off when they can start the season on time. And now there is a larger gap between, seasons for baseball. You go from October, and then all of a sudden, you take October, November, December, January, February, guys start reporting back to camp. March is spring training just about, and then April is the season. So it could take a little bit of time, maybe not as much as other sports, but it could take a little bit of time to reset and allow kind of a normal start to occur right back into, when the season should begin. I think it could also continue to deteriorate relationships between the players and the owners. Again, I've mentioned that before in the segment. They're not at a very good stage right now, and as a result, anything that could be seen as, a little bit off, or something that the players don't like, or something that the owners don't like, whatever, I think that this could, again, build up that anticipation that I think we're all feeling of a baseball strike. And, I've seen it all over the place. This is some of the worst owner-player relationship that we've seen since about the 90s, when the player strike last happened in 94. So this could definitely be a frightening thing in terms of a strike occurring. But then I could also see maybe, the aftermath of some financial hits still being, dealt with by certain teams, right? If there's a delayed season and they are allowing fans back in the stands, a team like down in Florida maybe that are okay with that and allowing fans back in, you delay the season, that could throw things off for them even more financially, and it could set some teams back even further. So that could be a big problem. And I think that's what also is very frightening in the grand scheme of things for some of these teams is, what are they going to do financially? How are they going to rebound after last year? A lot of teams are hoping to get fans back in the stands. A lot of teams are hoping to have some sort of normalcy. But if there's a delayed season, who knows? Now, here's the other question. Or here's the other point. How long of a delay will it be? Will it be a delay that goes all the way up until July? I don't think so. Because, again, we were playing baseball just about the midway point of July. Around July 15th or so was right when baseball was starting back up. And then after that, it was full swing ahead from there. But April, May, and June, 3 months, no baseball. So you're missing 3 months of baseball. That's 3 months' worth of games. I personally think that if there is a delay, it shouldn't go any further than maybe the first 2 or 3 weeks of April, maybe even like up until the first week of May. Because if you start creeping into June, and this is the second straight year that this occurs, this could continue to be a problem. This could continue to be an issue for some teams financially, because then that's going to be another whole 3 months of missed financial gain, right? That's huge. That's 3 months of financial loss. And I think that people don't really realize, and not only the teams, but also the players, right? They're not going to be getting paid. They're not going to be making money to support them and their families. That's 3 months of pay that they're missing. So that's a huge other aspect of it. So I think that there should be some sort of coming together and almost collaborating, but also compromising on both sides. Because I think both sides, they want to make money back, and they want to just get back to playing baseball. They just want to get back out on the field. So I feel like if they can both come to that common ground, they can move through this issue and work through it. But the final thing that I think could really impact baseball, and this pandemic and the delayed season could really have a drastic effect on, is how it could affect minor leaguers. I mean, if their season was canceled last year when the MLB was delayed, what if we saw that same issue? How is this, prospect wood bat league in the MLB gonna fare? How is this pipeline league gonna do? I mean, how is all of this developmental stuff that the MLB is doing going to be affected if there's a delay to the season? Maybe it won't be affected, but if guys are not able to go out and have a season in the minor leagues, this could be an issue for some guys in their development and just their overall scouting and their overall just, exposure to teams. Right? I mean, if they're not exposed to teams, if they're not exposed to scouts, that's going to be a problem. They're not going to be able to really allow their career to take off as it should. So hopefully things can get better, and, we can kind of work out of this situation. Maybe we can get back to some sort of, situation where by the end of the summer, maybe we're seeing full fans in the stands. But they're going to need to play baseball first. They're going to need to try and figure out this season. I've already seen that the season is not going to be delayed as of right now, but that could change. Again, we're in February right now. We've got all of February still, and then we've got March. So these are 2 months that are going to tell a lot. They're going to be really, really telling months. If they can get it together and if they can play, or if they're going to have to push things back and push things back and push things back. My question, though, and my final thing is, what is it going to take for one side to give? Which side, and what is it going to take for that side to give? Is it going to be, all right, enough of this, we're just going to do it? All right, enough of this, we'll just pay you this. All right, enough of this, we're just going to start, we want to get back out on the field. What is it going to take for one of these sides to kind of just, wave the white flag and say, hey, we surrender, we'll do whatever, we just want to get this thing over with. We are sick of it. And, I mean, maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe that doesn't occur. So there's a lot of still things to, I think, get figured out. I'm very hopeful that the season will start on time. If it doesn't, maybe it gets pushed back a couple weeks. But I really don't see it starting in July again. I think that could be so detrimental to baseball overall. And I think that's when baseball would be hitting the panic button. And I think Rob Manfred would be on the most scorching hot seat in all of sports. He would be a man that would have a lot to answer, and I think an even bigger headache on his hands. So we'll have to see what goes on, but that's going to close it out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial, I want to get into the recent moves in the free agency and trade markets that could really put certain teams into a playoff and possibly World Series conversation for this upcoming season. Folks, it's been a lot of fun so far, but don't go anywhere. We've got a lot more to go. Don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again. And in the previous segment, I jumped into discussing the effects and concerns I have for the MLB and baseball in general if the season is delayed for a second straight season. But I want to now get into discussing some players that have recently been added to new teams or added back to familiar teams that could put these ball clubs into a new conversation for the playoffs and possibly even the World Series. So there's a couple big adds of recently that I want to highlight, and some of them I think could really pay off for teams in the long run. I mean, I think that they could potentially be those little added pushes that they need to really tilt the scale and kind of push them over the edge to be that World Series contending team. So first team I want to get into, the Braves, obviously, with them re-signing Marcell Ozuna. Pretty clear that the Braves needed to do this, right, and what they needed to do. Going into this offseason, and I've mentioned this a million times, I think they needed to try and keep Ozuna around and go out and get veteran pitching. They clearly did that early on with Charlie Morton. Then they bring back Marcell Ozuna. This is going to do a lot of things for this Braves team because it's, again, another really good bat in the lineup. Very questionable about his fielding, but at the same time, the hitting and the offense overcompensates for itself. So I think that if Ozuna can get back, or at least somewhat to the similar level that he was at in this past year, so whatever his numbers were equivalent to a 60-game season, now put that on the scale of a 162-game season. So let's say, maybe he bats around 295. He's got maybe around a 980, 970 OPS. And we'll say about 35 to 40 home runs, 90-plus RBIs. That's going to be a really, really big add in that lineup. Because think about it. In 2019, they had a guy like that in Ronald Acuna. They already have Freddie Freeman there, so that's already an added plus. Now you've got an extra guy in Marcell Ozuna who's putting up similar numbers and that is capable of putting up those kinds of numbers. So I'm very curious to see how he does in kind of a second season in Atlanta, if he's able to build off of that previous year in Atlanta. But the biggest thing, I think, is going to be how will this team compete with the other very, very strong teams in their division? Because, I mean, the other teams are quite stacked, if you ask me. I think that if you have teams like the Mets going out and getting Lindor, you've got the Nationals getting Josh Bell and Kyle Schwarber, and then Brad Hand. The Mets obviously made other moves, but, the Phillies getting GT Real Muto, and they are also re-signing Didi Gregorius. A lot of different moves being made that have made this division incredibly competitive. And there's been a lot of good pitching added to this division as well. So how is that going to affect Ozuna? But he clearly was able to handle, the pitching of this division last year, right? I mean, we saw, guys on the Nationals like Scherzer, he was injured a little bit. DeGrom was, DeGrom actually had a really good year. So DeGrom, for the most part, he held his own. And I think that really speaks volume to him as a hitter. He's a very talented hitter, but it's going to be, can he be back at that same point on top of the mountain that he was last year, right? I mean, he had literally the second best batting average. I mean, the Braves had the second best batting average as a team last year. Marcell Ozuna had a lot to do with that. They had the most RBIs in the MLB as a team. Marcell Ozuna had a whole lot to do with that since he led the entire NL in RBIs. So they have a lot of success with him being on their team. Not to mention, it's the first year that they go to the NLCS and win a playoff round since the 2001 season to the 2000 season, something like that. So quite some time, a very, very, very long time. And Marcell Ozuna, I think, was the biggest difference maker. And I think that now they've got Charlie Morton, they might be poised to make a World Series run. As crazy as that sounds, I could definitely possibly see that. I think that they need to get out of that division, though. They need to try and find a way to get out of that division because, in my opinion, there's no clear-cut favorite. There's no runaway. There's no obvious team because all of those four teams, and again, the Marlins, I kind of feel bad for them that I leave them out, but they're not there yet. I think that they could maybe get there one day, but they're not there yet. These other teams, they've made those ads, they've made those moves, and this is going to be a really competitive division. Not to mention the way his contract is structured, his money is a very back-ended, so he'll be making more money in the later years. He's only making $12 million this year, so it's $6 million less than he did last year. So that could allow them to make a couple other moves, honestly. They were well under their budget of $152 million. They could go out, they can make a couple more ads before spring training, and they could really, really, really build up on this team. So I think that Ozuna going back to the Braves, that's going to have so much lasting impact, and I think that could really, really push them into the World Series. So another team that I think could really do very well, but I'm just a little skeptical of the player that they got because his career numbers don't really add up to the season that he had last year. Trevor Bauer going to the Dodgers. I mean, it clearly puts them in the contention conversation. They're the reigning World Series champs. They already have a really good lineup. They've already got a very, very stacked lineup. But and obviously Bauer is coming off of a career year, winning the Cy Young, having a career low in ERA, being third in the MLB in strikeouts, and this Dodgers team, they really did well from the mound. They were the top team in team ERA. They were the top team in team wins. But they struggled in strikeouts as a whole. I mean, they were only tied for 18th in the league in team strikeouts. So bringing in Bauer, a guy that's put up 200-plus strikeout numbers in previous years, a guy that was third in the MLB last year in strikeouts, that's a perfect thing to add to your rotation, right? And you've already got a great rotation as it is. You've got Clayton Kershaw, you've got Walker Buehler, Dustin May, Julio Urias, and you've got, Trevor Bauer. And we'll see how they kind of, maneuver that around. Maybe they put somebody, like Dustin May in the bullpen. Maybe they put Urias in the bullpen. Either way, if you've got guys like that can be versatile, and you've got starters like Bauer and Kershaw, that's a really good rotation, if you ask me. Really good rotation. But their defense was obviously getting it done in other ways. Their strikeout numbers weren't great, and they do have a great defense. I mean, you've got two of the best outfielders roaming in the outfield with Mookie Betts and then also Cody Bellinger. So that has a lot to do with it as well. But on top of it, you had a great third baseman, but he's not there anymore. Justin Turner's gone, unless he, comes back and he re-signs. But in all honesty, I think that Bauer going on to the Dodgers is a pretty good add, and it could definitely be, something that pushes them, again, back into that World Series, and maybe it allows them to repeat. But if you look at his numbers, this is where I'm very curious by this. His numbers haven't necessarily been incredible, I would say, over the last 9 years. He had two really good years in 2017 and 2018. He did have a career high in strikeouts in 2019, but he had the fourth highest ERA in his career in 2019. So that does kind of bring a little bit of a cause of concern for me. A guy that is a high strikeout guy, but he also gives up a lot of runs. So that does kind of scream, a home run caliber kind of, or a home run prone pitcher. And you don't want to have one of those on your team. His ERA has been below 4 only twice in his career. And one of those years, he was only in a 60-game season. Again, started the fewest games in his career since his 2012 and 2013 this past season. So he has not started this few of games in his entire career since 2013. And again, the ERA only being down below 4 in 2 out of 9 years, that's not a really good percentage if you ask me. I mean, Trevor Bauer, I think he might have one-year wonder written all over him. If he does, it's going to be a big waste of money. But if not, it could be a huge payoff for them. I think that this is going to be a very top-heavy division, and I think that the Dodgers are going to really have to concern themselves with the Padres. It's going to be very competitive the whole way through with those two teams, two of the heaviest hitting teams, two of the heaviest pitching teams, and unless there's, some sort of, other crazy new addition to one side or the other, or, God forbid, there's injuries to these newfound players on these new teams, whatever, this is going to be a dogfight between the Padres and the Dodgers atop that division. So I'm really curious to see how it will pay off, and I'm also very curious to see, will Bauer be what he's worth? Will he live up to the money that he's being paid? $40 million a year, really for the next 3 years. I mean, 40-plus million. He's going to be making more than the Indians team is going to be making, more than the Pirates team, and more than the Orioles team. That's a lot of money. I mean, those payrolls were, well under $40 million, and Trevor Bauer is making $40 million this year. So that is, I think, a little bit of, I don't want to say a head-scratcher because he definitely proved it this past year, but can he build on that? Can he capitalize on that? Can he come back next year and have similar success? Or was that just kind of a luck of the draw, 60 games, and he really benefited from that? So we'll have to see. But another move that I think secretly, I mean, again, this isn't a move like Trevor Bauer going to the Dodgers, Marcell Ozuna going back to the Braves. This isn't some huge groundbreaking move. It's kind of a quiet move that I think is going to be very beneficial for the Phillies, and that's getting Chase Anderson. This is why. They went out and got a lot of bullpen pitching, and they needed to. Jose Alvarado, they got Archie Bradley. You got guys that are good pitchers that are going to come out of the pen. Alvarado being a back-end reliever, somebody that can come in later innings, and, he brings that experience. Then you also have the hitting. You bring back Real Muto. You bring back Gregorius. You've got Harper already there. Rhys Hoskins and Alec Baum. I mean, and then let's not forget Gene Segura. They've got a pretty solid team across the board. Now you go out and you get Chase Anderson. Why I like this is because if you look at their rotation, they've got Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler and Zach Eflin. All three of them, I think, are pretty solid pitchers. Nola and Wheeler would be the front men, in my opinion, for that rotation. Eflin's kind of a nice third option. But after that, it drops down significantly. I mean, the other three starters that started a significant number of games, they had a 5 ERA or more, whereas Eflin, Wheeler, and Nola had a 3 ERA or lower. So that's the biggest drop-off right there, if you ask me. Going out and getting somebody like Chase Anderson, yeah, he didn't have a great year last year. I mean, he had over a 7 ERA, but he does bring a capability to him. As a fourth starter, I would not be mad at having Chase Anderson there. He brings, again, experience. He's had seasons where he's been efficient. I mean, over 120 Ks over the last 2 years, and then at least 8 wins. I mean, that's honestly perfect for a back-end fourth starter, if you ask me. In 2018, 2019, are pretty good years, and I think that, and he keeps his ERA at a relatively low level, then this could be a move that really does a lot of wonders for them. And I think that Eflin would get the third nod. I think that he'll be the third starter, and then Anderson will be the fourth starter while, Wheeler and Nola kind of figure out who's going to be 1 and 2. But having Anderson there, and somebody that, again, he was on winning teams. I mean, he brings a winning mentality. He was there with the Brewers when they went to the NLCS. So he knows how to win. He's been on winning teams. And this Phillies team, they have not been to a playoffs in over 10 years. So right there, that's going to tell you something. Or maybe it's been 9 years. One of the two. They haven't been to the playoffs in a really, really long time. So them getting Chase Anderson, although it's not some big glamorous move, I oddly enough think that it could actually do a lot of wonders for them. I think that it could do a lot of interesting things for them in the long run, because this is going to be a team that needs that starting pitching. They're going to need that relief pitching, because their relief pitching was atrocious last year, and their starting pitching wasn't all that great. Now, where Chase Anderson does go wrong is he is kind of home run prone, right? That could be a problem. I mean, this team gave up the 12th most home runs last year as a whole, so I think that this could be one glimmer of negativity I could see, something that is not a very bright, shiny spot on, the silver platter. We'll have to see how he does in this very heavy NL East. Again, a lot of really good hitters, a lot of really powerful hitters, guys like Marcell Ozuna, Josh Bell, Kyle Schwarber, Pete Alonso. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. So I think that, honestly, the Phillies, they keep making moves that really deepen their roster, and I think that this is going to be an NLES team that, and really just a whole entire, division in the NL East that could really be competitive the entire way through. So really like that move by the Phillies, even though it's not very glamorous. It's still very interesting to see nonetheless. So my last two moves I want to get into, one of them, Fowler going to the Angels. Yes, Dexter Fowler getting traded to the Angels. And again, another not so glamorous move, I would say, but a move that is going to, I think, do wonders for them, because he brings that winning mentality. He's been on a World Series winning team in 2016 with the Cubs, and he's a Gold Glove outfielder, caliber outfielder at least, somebody that's got that capability. He is a good fielder, and not to mention, the Angels outfield, it's a little hit or miss. Obviously, you got Mike Trout, you got Justin Upton, who has not been playing great recently. In all honesty, I think that he's kind of on the tail end of his career, but he does have pretty good power numbers, I will say. And, I mean, if you look at Upton's, OPS numbers, they were below 800 the last 2 years, but in the 2 previous years, in 2017 and 2018, it was above 800. So Upton, I don't think, is necessarily on his way out of his career, but then they've got up-and-coming guys like Joe Adell, who was awful this year. I mean, he batted 161. He was terrible for them. So they go out and they get Dexter Fowler, and they need somebody out in that outfield that can replace Joe Adell and can at least have a decent hitting year. It can at least be decent, right? I mean, 161 is not decent. That's terrible. And Fowler did struggle hitting as well this year, I'm not going to lie. But with that, kind of, again, seasoned player aspect that he brings, he's been in the league for 13 years, he's won a World Series, that could really do a lot of good things for this Angels team that have also, like the Phillies, not been in the playoffs for quite some time. This Angels team, I think, could see a very, very interesting kind of run this year. I don't think that they're necessarily going to be a World Series team. They're going to be on the cusp of being a playoff team, in my opinion. I remember last year, actually, I was saying coming into the season, I went back and I looked at teams' records through the first 60 games of the previous season. And I remember the Angels, they had a pretty good record. It wasn't great, but it wasn't awful. And I said, this could be an interesting team. At that point, they had added Anthony Rendon. So I said, you know what? I think that the Angels are going to have a really good year. And they were terrible. They were not good. And I really don't understand how the baseball team in the MLB, with the best baseball player, arguably, all-around baseball player in Mike Trout, is a terrible. I mean, they're literally a laughingstock in the AL West. I personally would say, them next to the Mariners. And I just think that, they have made some moves this offseason, getting Alex Cobb, getting Jose Iglesias. Now you get Dexter Fowler. They've done things that I think could maybe make them kind of a playoff-esque team, make playoff push-esques. Nothing crazy. I don't know if they'd necessarily get out of the first round, but it could definitely be moves that could pay off for them in the long run and could do wonders for them, in all honesty. So I like it. I don't love it, but I think that it could be another just extra addition, kind of the extra trophy on the shelf, if you will. Nothing glamorous, but just something to kind of fill the spot, fill the void, and it's going to be efficient. And Dexter Fowler is very efficient. I mean, he's a good player. So, like the move by the Angels. The final one, Arenado to the Cardinals. I mean, how could this not at least put them in the playoff conversation, especially with two teams that are probably in rebuild modes right now, and then two teams that are big hit-or-miss teams for me. And I don't know if I want to say even if the Cardinals are a big, surefire, winner of the division, in my opinion, because I think that they still have, a lot of holes in that lineup that could be exploited. And obviously, I don't think Arenado is going to take them to the World Series because one player can't do it all. But I think that this is a trade that could, definitely have playoff implications. It could definitely lead them to the postseason. Arenado, he brings offense, he brings defense. 5-time All-Star. He's an 8-time Gold Glover. He's been a Gold Glover every year he's played in the MLB. And they absolutely needed to upgrade over at third base. I mean, Matt Carpenter is getting so old. He batted so poorly last year, and Arenado didn't even have that nice of a year last year. I mean, he had batted around 250, but it's way better than Carpenter, who batted a career-low 186. And he is getting older, too. He's 35 years old. So this is, I think, a good time to kind of exercise the moving out of the old and bringing in of the new. And Arenado, I think, is going to be that new third baseman. Very similar to when they brought in Goldschmidt after Albert Pujols, right? They bring in somebody to kind of revitalize, and I don't want to say maybe be a bridge for the next generational talent that comes up through the Cardinals, but, Goldschmidt, he's been very efficient there, and I think sometimes we forget that he's there, but he's still got a great bat on him. And Arenado, he's going to do the same thing. The one thing I worry about is that this payroll, they wanted to be pretty low this year, but with getting Arenado, that's not the case. I mean, it's nice that the Rockies gave them about $50 million to help pay off his contract, but at the same time, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money that he's still owed on his contract, and he just signed an extension. So how is that going to affect things, right? And then not to mention you bring back Yadier Molina on a one-year deal. Maybe they, at the trade deadline, they ship him off and they get rid of his payroll or whatever they might do. I have no idea. But the financial aspect of it, I think the Cardinals need to pay a little bit more attention to, because if not, they're definitely going to run into some problems. But we'll have to see. I think all of these moves can at least put some teams into the playoffs, some teams into the World Series, the Braves and the Dodgers especially. The Cardinals, probably more of a playoff team. The Phillies, the same thing. I would go with the Angels, the same thing, playoff teams. But all in all, I think that these moves could maybe put these teams into conversations that they have not been in quite some time. So I'm very excited to see how these new faces in these new places kind of mesh and form and really gel on their new teams, and how the chemistry kind of builds up and they kind of try and put it all together and put it out on the field. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around. But stay right there, because we will be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I will be back with another Buy It or Deny It segment discussing whether I buy or deny the idea of Bauer going to the Dodgers and Ozuna coming back to the Braves could solidify their respective spots in the NLCS this upcoming season, and we could see possibly a rematch of this year's NLCS. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we've got one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you. And in the previous segment, I got into sharing which recent moves by some teams I could see paying off for certain ball clubs, and I could put those teams, or at least put those teams into the conversation for either the playoffs or even the World Series. But I want to dive into this buy it or deny it final segment where I'm going to discuss whether I buy or deny the fact of whether Ozuna returning to Atlanta and Bauer going to LA could solidify the two-team spots for the NLCS for this upcoming season. Now, as we know, the Braves, they were up 3-1 in this past year's NLCS, and they really, it was just, there was, like, and I've mentioned it earlier in the show, I mentioned briefly, they couldn't get over this hump. They couldn't get over a hump for a very, very long time. They finally were able to get over, getting past that first round that just really gave them the hardest time for so long. Then they get to the NLCS. They're literally one game away from the World Series, and then they keep losing, and they keep losing, and the Dodgers win 4 straight games, whatever it was. So the biggest thing that everybody knew, and it was really talked about after the series, was there was a lack of veteran pitching, and they already went out and addressed that. But the other biggest question mark was Ozuna returning to the Braves, because as we could all see, this was probably some of the best baseball the Braves have played in a long time, and Ozuna just so happened to be on the team during that period of time. So I don't think it's a happy coincidence. I think there's something that is, again, leading up into that, and that is the fact that Marcell Ozuna is somebody that he's a difference maker. He can do a lot of things from the plate that a lot of guys can't. Now, over for L.A., they were already set with the pitching. I really didn't think that they needed to go out and get any pitching. I thought they needed to go out and get some position guys because they're acting very, very relaxed. That they right now don't really have, I think, a second baseman figured out with Kike Hernandez. Now, he did move around the infield, and they could move guys around, so that would be all right. But then guys like, Justin Turner, what are they going to do about him? I mean, are they going to go out and get a third baseman? Are they not worried because he's going to resign? Whatever it might be. But they went out and got Trevor Bauer, and as we all know, Trevor Bauer had an incredible season this past year. I just am a little speculative of his season. I'm kind of curious to see if he can come back to the point that he was at last year, again this year, because in his previous years in his career, he has not done that. He has not put up the numbers that he put up this season, not even close. So I want to get into it because both teams, they're going to excel, right? I mean, there's no question about it. Bauer brings pitching to a team that was tops in the MLB in team ERA and team wins by pitchers. So you bring, and then not to mention, they also need to have a little bit of help with a guy that's a high strikeout guy, a high strikeout volume guy. Bauer is exactly that. I mean, he's had multiple 200-plus K seasons. He was third in the MLB last year in strikeouts. So adding him to a team that was 18th in team Ks last year, that's going to be a big up for them. And then the Braves, they already have a ton of hitting. And they showed last year, I mean, they were the league best in team RBIs. They were second in team average. And so as a result, bringing back Ozuna to that already built-up lineup and already that success, it's going to do wonders. It really is. They're both going to be in hard divisions, though. That's going to be the biggest thing. Ozuna is going to have, I think, more competition to deal with than Trevor Bauer will. I think that Trevor Bauer is just really going to have to worry about the Padres. Other than that, though, I would not be scared of the Giants if I'm Trevor Bauer. I wouldn't be scared of the Rockies, and I definitely would not be scared of the Diamondbacks. I wouldn't be scared of any of those three teams. I would only have concerns about the Padres. And so as a result, I think that Trevor Bauer, he's not necessarily an easier way, but he doesn't have to fight through so many, tree branches, if you will, to get out of the woods. I think Marcell Ozuna is going to have a little bit harder of a time in the thickets of that NL East this year because it is chock full of talent. I mean, there is so much, and it's arguably the one division where there's so much widespread talent and there's a surplus of it. It's a very unique division, and that's why I'm personally so fascinated by it. But Ozuna, he's got to really worry about a wide array of talent and all the new ads. And Bauer, I mean, he doesn't really have to worry about that as much, right? He doesn't have to have that big of a concern. And the other thing that I'm concerned about Bauer is he really worth that $40 million? Is he going to be a guy that winds up being a flop and he really actually does more harm than he does good? That could be an even bigger problem for them. And if that's the case, they're going to have, I think, a couple issues on their hands in terms of the money that they're going to have to, fork over to him. That is, I don't think, it could potentially not even be worth it. He might not even be worth that money. And Ozuna, he's been proven before. He's gone out, he's won Silver Sluggers, he's been an All-Star multiple times, he's been a Gold Glover, and he's been a little bit more accomplished in his career than Bauer has. I mean, Bauer's only been to an All-Star game once, and then he's been, again, won the Cy Young last year. But this is just, it's a very, very interesting case because there are two huge adds to these teams that were both at the top of their game last year, and it might put them back to where they were last year. But the problem is the competition that they have to go up against, right? That's the biggest thing for me. Everybody's saying, well, the Braves, they've gotten Ozuna back, and that's probably, a done deal that they're going to win the NL East. I don't think so. Not at all, because you look at the New York Mets, right? Look at who they've got. They added Francisco Lindor, and then I've rattled off the names a million times. Dominic Smith, Jeff McNeil, Pete Alonso. The list goes on and on and on. And then you've got pitching. You've got Jacob deGrom. You've got Noah Syndergaard. You add back Marcus Stroman. You add Carlos Carrasco. You bring in James McCann. You do a lot of things to really bolster this lineup. And then you look at the Nationals, what they did. They added Brad Hand. They added Josh Bell. They added Kyle Schwarber. And then the Phillies, they bring back Real Muto. They add some really good bullpen pitching, which they needed to do desperately. They re-signed Gregorius. Every team in that division did what they needed to do. I personally think that at least the four contending teams in my eyes, they did everything that they needed to do to get to that level. And so as a result, I think that it's going to be a challenge for really any team in the NL East to come out on the winning end. It's going to be a very, very hard-fought division. The NL West, they don't have to worry about that. Trevor Bauer does not have to worry about guys like Josh Bell and Kyle Schwarber and Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso and JT Realmuto and Didi Gregorius. Sure, he's got to worry about a lot of those, all the players on the Padres pretty much, the entire Padres team. But on the Giants, who's he going to worry about? Mike Yastrzemski and Donovan Solano? Who knows if Buster Posey will be back. And then the Diamondbacks, Ketel Marte and Cole Calhoun maybe David Peralta. The Rockies, maybe Charlie Blackmon. Don't have to worry about Nolan Arenado anymore. Maybe Trevor Story. That's not, I would say, as of a dangerous team teams, I should say, as the other teams in the NL East. I really genuinely believe that. And I just wonder if, this Braves team, I think that they can get back to that point that they were at last year, but I think that the other teams in their division have made fellow and additional adds that they needed to make in order to put themselves in a whole different conversation. I really do believe that. And so as a result, it's going to be, I think, a little bit of a challenge for teams like the Braves to really come out unscathed in the NL East. And I think that Bauer, he's got a lot to prove. $40 million, that's a lot of money. Not to mention he's making more money than 3 entire baseball teams' rosters are, each of those teams. So you really have to hope that Bauer is going to put together the same success that he had in Cincinnati and in some in Cleveland, because if not, it's just going to be another uphill battle. And not to mention, though, I really don't know if he has a poor performance, if it would affect the Dodgers overall. They've got so many weapons, and their pitching is so lethal that I really don't think that one guy having a poor year is going to do anything. And so that's why I think the Dodgers, they're going to have a lot easier of a road getting to the NLCS than the Braves. The Braves are going to have to scratch, claw, push, pull, and fight all the way to the very end. And I just don't know if once you get to that point, right, and you get to that point in the playoffs, what do you do? How exhausted are you at that point? How tired, how laborious was it to get to that point of the season, and how strenuous was it that you had to fight through 3 other teams, whereas a team like the Dodgers, they only had to deal with the Padres, and that was about it. And if they take care of that business, they should be fine. They should be fine. Again, should be. Who knows if they will be, but they should be. And I think that even if the Braves come out on top, and even if, the Dodgers come out on top in their respective divisions, I just think it's going to be so hard for the Braves to withstand even further, competitive baseball going beyond. I mean, because their division's going to essentially be a playoff race, I think, the entire way through. And it's going to be, unless I'm way wrong on the Phillies, or I'm way wrong on the Mets, or I'm way wrong on the Nationals. But all of these teams, they made multiple moves, and they made multiple major moves, I would say. It wasn't like one team made one really big move. They made a couple small moves, how kind of the Royals did it. They were small, strategic moves that they made. No, the Nationals, they go out and get Josh Bell, who 2 years ago had 37 home runs. They go out and get a guy like Kyle Schwarber, who a couple years ago had 38 home runs. Then the Mets go out and get Francisco Lindor, who's been arguably the best hitting shortstop since 2016. And then you've got the Phillies re-signing all of their guys back. So there's a lot of new ads, but there's also a lot of familiar faces that are coming back. And as a result, I just really don't know if it's going to be an easy way out for the Braves. I really, really don't. And I think that the Dodgers, and who knows, I mean, maybe the Giants have a really good year. I mean, I could see maybe the Giants being that sneaky third team in the NL West. I really don't have any hope for the Rockies with losing Arenado, and I don't have any hope for the Diamondbacks because they're the Diamondbacks, and I'm not really impressed with what they have. I think that they've got good pieces, but I don't think that's going to be enough to put together a full-length season. So I'm going to ultimately deny this claim. I'm going to completely deny it. I do not think that with these additions and with these re-adds that these two teams will meet back up in the NLCS. Why? Because it's just going to be really hard for the Braves to fight through the thickets of the NL East, and the Dodgers, they're going to have a much easier road ahead of them. And so as a result, I could see the Dodgers going back to the NLCS much more than I could see the Braves, not because the Braves aren't good, not because the Braves didn't do what they needed to do. It's because there's other teams that are going to get in their way that have arguably, just as good, if not better, rosters than the Braves do right now. What the Braves have that I think a lot of these other teams don't have is the chemistry. The chemistry has stayed the same. The collective, the togetherness that the Braves have and the personnel that they have that have been together for a couple years now, that's going to be really hard to break. And teams like the Nationals, and especially teams like the Mets, who really added a lot of new guys, new egos, new mindsets, everything, you're going to have to get used to that. And there could be, first-season jitters or first-season kinks that they need to work out, whereas the Braves, they can go right back into normal business. They can go right back into rolling into things because it's a familiar team, it's a familiar setup of guys, and they know how each and every single one of them will operate. Not to mention, they did go very far last year, but this division was not nearly what it was last year. Not anywhere close to it, right? I mean, you look at the Nationals, for instance. They are the most glaring obvious because they were the worst team in that division. They make 2 huge moves, and then they get really good relief pitching, and all of a sudden, they're in a totally different stratosphere. So that's why I'm going to deny it, because it's just a different division. It's a different setup for teams, and I just think that the chemistry is going to play a factor into all of this for some of the other teams, maybe not so much the Braves, but if they figure out that chemistry, it's going to be hard for the Braves to really come out unscathed and untouched in that NL East. I don't know why I keep saying NL East. NL East. So ultimately, I'm going to deny this claim, right? I don't see both teams meeting back up, facing off against each other in the NLCS this year. I do see the Dodgers going far, not so much the Braves, just because, again, I feel like a broken record. It's just there's too many things in their way. So we'll have to see. I could be very wrong, but I'm going to ultimately deny that claim. But folks, that's going to wrap it up for us here today. As always, thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review that really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that would really, really help us out as well. As always, everyone, thanks so much again for listening, and until next time, have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.